Have you ever suddenly forgotten where you put your keys or what you were going to say? In this video, we're going to talk about why people often forget things easily. So, stay tuned on Mining Power. First of all, before we discuss why we often forget, we need to understand memory in the world of psychology. Memory, or what we commonly call recall, is the brain's ability to store, retain, and recall information. This memory process can be divided into three main stages. First, there's encoding. In this stage, the information we receive from daily experiences or from what we've learned is converted into a form that can be stored in our brain. For example, if you meet a new person and learn their name, your brain is encoding that information so it can be stored. Second, there's storage. This is the stage where the information that was encoded earlier is stored in our brain. Some information is stored in short-term memory, while others go into long-term memory. If we don't frequently access or use that information, it can be forgotten. Lastly, there's recall. This is the process of trying to access the information that was stored earlier. For example, when you try to remember the name of someone you met yesterday, this is where the recall process works. But if this process is disrupted or the information wasn't stored well, you might forget it. Have you ever wondered how our brain stores all the information we get every day? From remembering phone numbers to skills like riding a bike, everything is stored in what we call memory. First, there's sensory memory. This is like the most basic memory, where all the information from our senses is captured. For example, imagine closing your eyes and still seeing the afterimage of what you just saw. That's sensory memory. It's super quick and only lasts for a moment, but it's crucial for capturing all the details of the world around us. Next up, we have short-term memory. This is the memory that holds information for a short period. For instance, you just heard a phone number and you remember it for a few seconds before it fades away. The capacity is small, guys. It can only hold about 7 items at a time. So, if you forget a phone number right after hearing it, it's totally normal. Moving on to something more serious, there's long-term memory. This is what stores all the more permanent information, like childhood memories, learned skills, or general knowledge. Its capacity is enormous and can last a long time. This is what lets you remember your kindergarten friend's name, even though you haven't seen them in ages. Then, there's declarative memory, which handles facts and events. Here, there are 2 subcategories. Episodic memory, which stores memories of personal events, and semantic memory, which stores general knowledge. So, when you remember how fun your birthday party was as a kid, or when you know that Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia, that's the work of declarative memory. Lastly, there's procedural memory, which is related to skills and habits. This is the memory that lets you ride a bike or type without thinking. It's automatic because your brain has stored this information really well. So, even if you haven't ridden a bike in a while, once you get back on, your brain immediately remembers how to ride it. Now let's talk about why we often forget. There are several reasons why this happens, and all of them are related to how our brain works. First, there's something called decay theory. This theory suggests that memories can fade over time, especially if they aren't frequently accessed or revisited. For example, you might forget lessons you learned in school years ago because you rarely use that information anymore. Second, there's interference theory. This happens when new memories clash with old memories, or vice versa. For instance, if you're learning 2 foreign languages at the same time, words from one language can get mixed up with words from the other language in your brain. Third, retrieval failure. This occurs when we can't recall something because our brain has trouble accessing that information. It usually happens when we're stressed, panicked, or not focused. For example, during an exam, you suddenly blank out, even though you're sure you studied that topic. And lastly, there's something called motivated forgetting. Sometimes we unconsciously choose to forget things that are uncomfortable or painful. It's like a defense mechanism for our brain to protect us from stress or trauma. Nowadays, there are so many situations that make us realize how often we forget things. For example, have you ever forgotten your social media password? Or maybe You're in a rush to leave the house, only to remember that you forgot your phone or wallet. Have you ever gotten into the car, ready to go, and then realized you left the car keys on the table? These are all small examples of how our brain often doesn't remember important things. But what's interesting is that we tend to more easily remember bad events from childhood. Why? It's because strong emotions, especially negative ones, can make that information more strongly stored in our memory. Our brain tends to label bad events as something important to remember, so we can learn from that experience. But on the flip side, this can also make us more likely to forget small moments that are actually positive. Well, all these examples aren't just about our brain being lazy, but rather because of various factors happening around us. For instance, we're often distracted by phone notifications, social media, or multitasking. Our brain becomes overwhelmed, and as a result, information that should be well stored ends up slipping away. For example, you might forget someone's name you just met because when you were introduced, you were more focused on something else, like thinking about what you're going to say next or even busy checking your phone. Don't worry, guys. Forgetting isn't something that can't be overcome. There are a few simple tips you can do to reduce this forgetful habit. First, focus on one thing at a time. Don't multitask too much because our brain can get overloaded. If you focus on one thing, your brain can more effectively store that information. Second, get enough rest. Getting enough sleep is really important for brain health. When we sleep, our brain is actually working to process and store the information we got throughout the day. Third, make notes or reminders. Use technology like notes apps or alarms on your phone to remind you of important things. Don't just rely on memory, because sometimes our brain needs a little help. Fourth, repeat important information. If there's something you need to remember, make sure you often repeat it or use it in daily life. For example, try mentioning the name of someone you just met a few times in conversation to make it stick in your memory. Remember, guys, forgetting is normal and can be overcome with those simple steps. The important thing is to understand the cause and know how to reduce this habit. So don't worry if you often forget. The important thing is to keep learning to be more focused and aware of what you're doing. All right, that's our discussion on why people often forget. I hope this information is useful for you. If you have other tips for dealing with forgetfulness, don't hesitate to share them in the comments section. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss other interesting videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.